Hey guys, Wolvie here and welcome back to the channel. As always, the usual disclaimer, any opinion here is mine and mine alone. And now we are here with RWBY Volume 9, Chapter number 3. Now, the name of this particular chapter is called, let me grab my book here, and for the record, it's this one, because it's got all my notes. It's called Rude, Red, and Royal. So basically here is we have an introduction of a newer character in this particular chapter, and that is the Red Prince. So, again, this comes down to Blake's knowledge of RWBY's take on Alice in Wonderland. So, basically here is that with chapters 1 and 2, I'm just going to go over the important aspects of this particular chapter, what I think about it, and I do want to address something I saw late last night, and I'll get to the latter later on in this video. So, the first thing to point out with Volume 9, Chapter 3, it is a bit of a lengthier episode than usual. I mean, you guys will have noticed in chapters 1 and 2, the episodes, and this is excluding the intro and the ending credits, it's about 15-16 minutes for the first two chapters. For the chapter 3, it's about 18-19 minutes if you exclude the intro and the ending credits. But again, so there's a couple of things here. So you have a slightly longer episode. You also have an introduction of a newer character by the name of Red Prince, as well as a quote-unquote butterfly. I couldn't really tell if it's teal or blue, but I know it's a particular shade. And the whole thing here, and this is from the trailer, so it looks like a bit of a chess game of some sorts, and that's where Weiss, Blake, and Yang are chess pieces. So they're quote-unquote used as pawns. Another thing here is that, and this is a bit of a spoiler, is that Weiss has a bit of a newer summit, or it looks like a hybrid of two summits, meaning that there's a summit from one enemy she played a role in defeating, and then there's another, her infamous summit. So it's a combination of those two. And she was pulling these summits off with the help of Blake and Yang. Also, looks like and the whole thing with the another character, in the sense of newer characters, we do see here the Curious Cat. Now, another thing here, I'm looking at my notes, mind you, so that way, if you see me looking down for a little bit, I'm just double checking my notes, making sure I've read things very clearly. Now, with the game, with the chess game, quote unquote, Little does help RWBY, and it looks like during the quote unquote the fight, like post chess game, it does appear that Blake has run out of dust ammunition, meaning that Blake will have to rely on her knowledge of the book, the blade, of Gamble's Shroud, alongside her semblance. So she's going to have to be very heavily reliant until they get back to Remnant and they get themselves more ammunition, which could be a sign of pretty bad things within the team. So that's it on that. Oddly enough, based on what I've observed in the chapter, it looks like there still is no confirmation of Bumblebee being canon. And I'm going to get into what I've observed on Twitter and the Crunchyroll comment section of this a little bit later. So stay tuned for what I have to say to that, because there are people who won't like it. But there are things like about what I've observed I do need to get off my chest. So that's down that. It looks like Weiss could summon a little bit faster now, because she was able to do part of one enemy and part of what she actually has in her repertoire at a little bit of a speedier rate. which could be a sign of Weiss's summoning abilities within what she can do. And what I mean by that, and it's evolving, is where she can do it a little bit faster, and she doesn't seem to be as fatigued. Because when it comes to Weiss's summoning ability, it's like she's doing things like a bit faster. She's not as tired. But she could wear herself out at the end of the volume. So it's a bit of a wait and see in that regard. But it does appear that Weiss's summoning abilities is improving. And by that, she's getting to certain ones faster. And also, she's not as fatigued. But Weiss does need to be careful. Now, what I mentioned here earlier, I'm going to check the time really quickly here. So, regarding Weiss, Blake, and Yang being chess pieces, they do shrink in size, and they stay that way, at least until the next chapter. So we don't know if they're going to be able to return to their regular size. So, we do see an angrier RWBY in the mix here, because it's like, I mean, and for a good reason. And then I noticed here that during that whole fight scene, I wouldn't be surprised if Yang taught Blake some, martial arts moves. Because we do know that a lot of what Yang herself does is, martial arts. And I would not be surprised if Yang has taught Blake some moves, which means, granted, we know that Blake ran out of dust ammunition. The whole thing with this, what she knows, is it could be a bit helpful in that regard until they get back to Remnant. So, when it comes down to, the whole command where it's RWBY tells them, kick their wood butts. It's you notice the letter A shows up. And it's just we may be seeing the whole thing regarding Alex spelled out that way in the subsequent chapters. So that's something I wouldn't be surprised if that actually happens. Let me grab my hair. So, and like I said before, Blake's knowledge of the book, where again it's RWBY's version of Alice in Wonderland, might be what helps them come home to Remnant. Now, the Curious Cats, they show the Red Prince the error of his ways, which means we may be seeing some connections to certain aspects. Now, at the end of this particular chapter, we do see Neo, she arrives at another section of Ever After, and it looks like it's the opposite side. But, again, if you remember, Weiss's, summoning ability has evolved, where it's she goes things with faster, and she's using a combination of two, because, if you remember part of that fight, Yang has a sword at the end. Although we see parts of another Grimm that she helped defeat, beforehand. So we're probably going to be seeing some evolving of semblances here. We're starting to see it with Weiss during that fight, and then the end we're seeing a little bit with Neo, which kind of helps further explain why Jean in Volume 8 his hands were went gold, because in Volume 5 it was more like a white/silver, and then in Volume 8 it was a bit more gold. So it looks like we're seeing semblances evolving here, because Volume 5 Jean discovered his. Volume 8 it looks like it was evolving. Volume 9 you see it at the in that chess fight with Weiss, and then in the end of Chapter 3 with Neo. So we're probably going to be seeing some semblance of evolution. Now, again, I don't think there's any confirmation of Bumblebee being canon as of yet, but I'm going to get into my brief opinion here later, alongside some of the stuff I've seen on social media and my opinions on that in a little bit. So I'm just going to go over my notes really quickly here. I'm going to make sure I have everything covered on my end. Okay, so there's one thing I forgot to cover, and that is I noticed, like, towards the end of the quote-unquote chess game, the Red Prince was not playing by the rules, meaning that he was very much willing to break them. So, with all of that, what do I think about this chapter? So, the fact that this chapter is longer than the other two, but not by much, it's like, it's still leaving some degree of information and things about RWBY as a team and all that stuff. It leaves a little bit to be desired still, because it's like, you have a solid chapter with chapter 2. Chapter 1, I'm like, I really wasn't feeling, because it was like, it left too much to be desired chapter 1. Chapter 2, not so much. Chapter 3, not so much. So it's like, this is not really, and this is a decent volume so far, but it's not one of those where it's like, I could cheer. And this is where I'm going to check the time again, make sure I have it, make sure I'm like decently on schedules here, so that way I'm not freaking out, whatever. So when it comes to the fandom, there's a decent amount of you that really need to be careful with what you put on social media. And the reason why I say this is because this is probably going to be what hurts RWBY in the long term. The reason why I said this is because I was just browsing through the comment section on Crunchyroll late last night, because I want to watch chapter 3 again to make sure there's certain things I missed or certain things I miswrote. And one of the comments I noticed on Crunchyroll's website is like, on chapter 3, it ended with something along the lines of people like that don't ship Blake and Yang are homophobic. This is not the first time I've seen this. One of the first times I've seen this personally was on Tumblr around 2019. And the labeling of that, you know, people who don't ship Bumblebee are homophobic, came from Bumblebee shippers who are quite toxic. It is the toxic Bumblebee shippers that is probably going to hurt RWBY in the long term. Not just the show, but also the team. Because if you think about it, with RWBY being larger, like in height and all that stuff, than the remainder of the team, it probably gives out another hint of a split coming. And like I said, I do have to reiterate the whole thing here. You have Blake and Yang looking at each other, with Weiss and RWBY looking at the viewer. This is very, in a way, this is similar to the end of the intro to Volume 6, where RWBY and Weiss get up together. But Blake and Yang are on opposite sides of the screen. And, again, if Team RWBY splits up once again, I would not be surprised if Bumblebee plays a major factor in that. Which could compel for Bumblebee to not remain canon. And RWBY being a huge catalyst to that, because Weiss has an idea what's going on. Volume 7, Ren and Nora don't see eye to eye in that regard. RWBY is not paying attention to what's going on within her own team. Although in Volume 7, there are a couple of hints in that regard. And all that stuff I'm going to get into a completely separate video on, regarding the Team RWBY split, and an even separate video on my thoughts on Bumblebee. And there are a lot of people who don't ship Bumblebee. A lot of them are criticizing the execution of the ship, meaning that there's no problem with them being canon. There's no problem with them becoming canon. It's how everything is written. Because when it comes to the execution of the final product, that what matters the most over planning, writing, animation. If you can't execute the final product in a way where people can see it being consistent and whatever have you, it's going to get criticized, and criticized correctly. Now, with the Bumblebee shippers, and I'm referring to the toxic ones, they're not seeing the execution of the ship being as bad as it is. There are some Bumblebee shippers on Twitter who have criticized the execution of the ship. And for a personal story of mine on Tumblr, I actually was booted out of Tumblr because of 2 very toxic Bumblebee shippers. And they don't realize, and they didn't realize, that I don't care about Bumblebee becoming canon. I am more concerned about the execution of the ship. And for someone, I actually write fan fiction. And mostly for another fandom. Where said fandom, and again, it's Final Fantasy 13 trilogy, if you're wondering which one I'm talking about. The Final Fantasy 13 fandom is a lot more civil. And that's partially because everybody tied to the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy has confirmed that when it comes to relationships between varying characters, it is open-ended. There is no thing saying, hey, this is canon, this is not. It's open-ended, it's on you, the individual player. And there have been some disagreements, between those in the Final Fantasy 13 community. It's just like it never got to the levels of what RWBY is now. Where you have toxic Bumblebee shippers labeling those who don't ship Bumblebee as homophobic. I believe there are some Bumblebee shippers who say that those who ship Weiss and Yang, and that's a rare pair known as Freezerbird, is lesophobic. So basically, the very toxic Bumblebee shippers, you guys really need to take a look at what you're saying on social media. Whether it be on Tumblr, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on the Crunchyroll comment section, or even Instagram, Facebook. You guys got to be really careful with what you're saying. Because if you're labeling people as something, and you can see Sandy wants to make his presence really known right now. But if you guys are assuming things about people and refusing to get to know them, it says a whole lot about you. And it's not, it's like, what's it's saying, it's not good at all. You are opening yourselves up to the same things you're doing to others. And it's something, and if that's something you don't mind being on the receiving end of, that is on you. But I will say that I am fed up with the very toxic Bumblebee shippers labeling those who don't ship them as homophobic, and the reasoning is fictional characters of an anime. I've discussed this with a couple of people on a Discord server late last night, and with the comment section. And they're not liking the very toxic Bumblebee shippers based on the replies I've received. So to the very toxic Bumblebee shippers. So I'm separating them from the Bumblebee shippers who are more reasonable in their reasoning. To the very toxic Bumblebee shippers, you guys need to change. Because it's going to hurt the fandom, it's going to hurt the show, and RWBY will not survive if you guys keep up with your antics. Because, in all honesty, you are only willing to talk to people who see the same things the same way as you. And that is very unfortunate to say from me. And to Crunchyroll, I am disappointed in this, and like the fact that you guys are allowing people to label those who don't ship Bumblebee as homophobic, because it could trigger panic attacks. It could trigger anxiety attacks. It can even trigger PTSD. Yeah, I'm saying mental health related issues because of the lack of monitoring. And again, there are Bumblebee shippers who are criticizing the execution of the ship on the show. And for the record, I will not be revealing who I ship on the show, because that is nobody's business. So I'm going to check the time one last time. Oh, I'm doing a lot better on time than I thought, but I had to get this rant out because, unfortunately, when it comes to the comment section for Volume 9, Chapter 3, it looks like some of the people on Tumblr are repeating what they've been doing since around 2019, and that's labeling non-Bumblebee shippers as homophobic, which says a lot about the very toxic Bumblebee shippers as more so than they think it is. And it's something that's got to change, and unfortunately the writers behind RWBY, they need to address this. Because you're going to lose more viewers if you're constantly not looking at who's saying what on social media. Now, granted, I do know that that's like, certain things have been said before, but it does need to be repeated because you're going to lose more revenue if people don't really monitor what's being said. And the writers should be saying something along the lines, people should be able to ship who they want without judgment. Because there are people who ship male-female ships on the show. And there are other female-female ships on the show besides Blake and Yang, including the rare pairs. And the rare pairs include Ladybug, which is Blake and Ruby, Monochrome or Checkmate, which is Blake and Weiss, Freezer Burnett, Yang and Weiss. And I know there's a pair, I think it's Prismatic Ponytails, I think it is. It's Ilya and Weiss. And I forgot the ship name for Blake and Ilya, so it's like, yeah. But the rant is necessary, and I think when it comes down to what I've saw in the comment section in Volume 9, Chapter 3, this is probably what's going to hurt the show in the long run, because if so many people leave, like, in the coming weeks, whatever, because of lack of monitoring and the very toxic Bumblebee shippers, I don't think it's going to survive beyond Volume 10 if Volume 10 gets the green light. I mean, we do know that the script is being written, but the volume itself does not have the green light yet. So, to recap, there's a decent amount of things going on. I do feel the team is set course to be split up once again. And, but the comment section, I think Crunchyroll needs to be more on the game in the sense of like, yo, do you have any proof of the homophobia over fictional characters? And if it's just fictional characters, then it's a complete lie. It's a libel and slander sort of thing. And the writers, they really need to start addressing, the whole accusations without proof. And this is a bit of a shorter video than what I usually do, but it is necessary for the sake of the video. It is filmed a couple of days ahead of Volume 3 being available to the public, and Volume 9, Chapter 4 available to the premium members. So I'm done with this video. With Wolvie here, signing off. I will catch you all on the flip side.